The flames danced wildly against the night sky, casting eerie shadows over what used to be my home. I stood barefoot in the driveway, heart pounding, face warm from the inferno. There was shouting behind me, neighbors calling out, someone yelling to the fire crew, but I barely heard them. All I could do was stare. It didn't feel real at first. The fire moved like it had a mind of its own, leaping from window to roof, curling around door frames like it belonged there. One moment, I was curled up on the couch with a book and a cup of tea. The next, I smelled something bitter, something wrong. I thought maybe it was just the heater acting up. But within minutes, the living room was full of smoke. I ran outside with nothing but my phone and the clothes on my back. Now, from a distance, the house looked like a lantern gone mad. I could see the photo frames on the wall blister and collapse. I thought of Mom's quilt, the one she spent months stitching by hand before she passed. I thought of my journals, my grandfather's old camera, the letters I never had the courage to throw away. All of it gone. I didn't cry. Not then. A fireman approached me, his face smudged with ash. He asked if anyone else was inside. I shook my head. Just me. My voice sounded like someone else's. He nodded and jogged back toward the engine. The next few hours blurred. Neighbors offered blankets. Someone handed me a bottle of water. I remember sitting on the curb, the ground cold beneath me. I watched as the flames slowly lost their hunger, shrinking down to glowing embers. Smoke curled into the sky like a signal, but I wasn't sure who it was for. Maybe me. Maybe the world. Maybe something bigger. And that's when it hit me. Not grief. Not panic, but clarity. It was like everything I had wrapped my life around had been stripped away in a single night. All the decorations, the clutter, the carefully chosen furniture, all the things I thought made up a home. But watching it all burn didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. I thought of the word freedom, and it didn't seem so far-fetched. The fire took everything I thought I needed. But standing there in the cool darkness, wrapped in someone else's jacket, I realized I was still here. Still breathing. Still me. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over. The following morning, the world smelled like smoke and silence. The house still smoldered, a blackened skeleton of what it once was. Yellow tape flapped gently in the wind, and ash dusted the grass like snow. I stood at the edge of the property, arms crossed tightly against my chest, watching the sun rise behind the ruins. There was no script for how to feel. Part of me expected to break down, to scream, to collapse into a puddle of tears. But all I felt was stillness, a heavy, surreal calm, as if my heart had gone quiet to make space for something else to come through. People talk about clarity like it's a warm light, a kind voice in your head. But for me, it was cold and exacting. It didn't comfort, it revealed. I could see my life, piece by piece, laid bare in the ruins. The job I hated but clung to for security, the half-finished projects, the unopened books, the dusty dreams shelved for someday. Everything I had packed into that space was gone, stripped away in hours. But what was left? Me. Only me. And maybe that was the truth the fire had come to show. Later that morning, a city inspector came by. He clicked his pen, took photos, jotted notes. A volunteer from the Red Cross handed me a pamphlet and offered to help me find emergency housing. I nodded politely, thanked them both, and accepted the kindness, even though it felt strange to receive help when I still didn't feel broken. As the sun rose higher, more neighbors stopped by. Some offered hugs. Others stood awkwardly, unsure what to say. One woman handed me a plastic grocery bag with toiletries, socks, and a granola bar inside. I didn't know her name. I don't think we'd ever spoken before. "Thought you might need something small," she said, eyes full of empathy. I managed a smile. "Thank you. Really." That night, I stayed at a friend's place. They gave me the guest room, freshly made with clean sheets and an extra blanket. I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, the echoes of the fire still crackling in my mind. My body felt like it was still vibrating from the adrenaline, but my thoughts were unusually clear. I remember my grandmother once telling me, sometimes God burns the whole thing down, so you stop hiding in it. Maybe that was what this was. Maybe the life I had built wasn't meant to last. Not because it was bad, but because I was meant for something more. Something different. Something I never would have chased if I hadn't been forced to. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered, "Okay, I'm listening." And for the first time in years, I meant it. I woke before dawn. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater. It wasn't my bed, but I didn't feel displaced. I felt new. Fragile. Yes, but fresh. I slipped on the donated socks, pulled on my coat, and stepped outside. The air was crisp. I walked back to the remains of my home. No one was there yet. It was just me, the house, and the rising sun. I stepped over the tape and into the remains, careful where I walked. The kitchen was a husk. The roof had caved in near the back wall, and charred wood stuck out like broken ribs. I crouched and ran my fingers through the debris, not expecting to find anything but rubble. But I did find something. A ceramic mug, cracked but intact. My favorite one. It said, "One day at a time." I sat there in the ruins, holding that mug in both hands, letting the memory of normal mornings wash over me. Coffee. Radio humming in the background. My dog wagging his tail by the door. The weight of everything hit me then, not just the fire, but all that had come before it. The years I spent surviving instead of living. The dreams I postponed. The truths I buried. This mug, this little piece of survival, felt like a message. One day at a time. I could do that. Cleanup began that same week. Volunteers came with gloves and masks. A local nonprofit dropped off dumpsters. People I hadn't spoken to in years showed up, tools in hand, ready to work. I was stunned by their presence, by how quickly people can become a community when someone is hurting. Together, we pulled burnt beams from the wreckage. We cleared out soggy drywall and twisted metal. One neighbor, Tom, worked quietly beside me, wiping sweat from his brow with a sooty rag. "I remember when you moved in," he said. "You painted your porch that bright blue." I thought it was wild. I laughed. My sister called it seaside optimism. "I liked it," he said. "Made the street feel alive." Little moments like that, shared between wheelbarrow trips and dusty jokes, began to stitch something inside me. Not just healing, but hope. Not in grand gestures, but in small, shared acts. A sandwich, a smile, a wheelbarrow full of ash. I was still hurting, but I was no longer alone. By the end of the week, the lot was cleared. A blank slate, and as I stood there, sore and tired, looking at the empty space, I realized this wasn't a funeral. It was a beginning, not a return to the old, but a step into the unknown. And I was ready to build. Laying the first brick wasn't metaphorical, it was real. A friend of a friend, Marcus, was a contractor who offered to help me rebuild. I didn't have a lot of money, but he said we could figure it out as we went. "What matters is starting," he said, "even if it's slow." We stood at the edge of the cleared lot. He handed me a trowel, and together, we placed the first foundation stone. My hands were shaky. The sun was high. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I smoothed the mortar, clumsy but determined. That evening, I sat in the grass, staring at the stone. It was so small in the emptiness of the lot, but it was a beginning. That mattered. Each day brought a little more progress. I juggled work and rebuilding, spending evenings and weekends on the lot. Volunteers showed up when they could. We shared sandwiches and stories. It wasn't just construction, it was communion. Something sacred in the struggle. Every nail hammered became an echo of resistance. Word spread about the fire and my decision to rebuild on my own. People came. Some I knew, others I didn't. An old classmate dropped off lumber. A retired carpenter named Ed spent 3 Saturdays showing me how to frame a wall. A local church donated insulation. One day, a teenager named Lenny rode his bike up and asked if he could help. I found out later he'd lost his own home 2 years ago in a flood. "It feels good to build something," he said. And just like that, he became part of the team. These people didn't ask for thanks. They just showed up, again and again, with time, with tools, with quiet strength. I started keeping a notebook with their names, not for gratitude, but remembrance, a living document of human kindness. I moved into a tiny rental not far from the lot. It was modest, 2 rooms, thin walls, a leaky faucet, but it was warm, safe. Each night I returned to it with sore muscles and hopeful thoughts. I spent less time on autopilot. Each morning started with intention. Coffee, planning, gratitude. Even work began to feel different. I no longer tolerated what drained me. I stood up for myself. I asked for what I needed, and when I didn't get it, I looked elsewhere. Opportunity began to knock, but only because I opened the door. The rebuild stretched on. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, permits delayed, rain that turned the site to mud, arguments over the best way to lay pipes. But it became a rhythm. Frustration, laughter, progress. Marcus stayed committed, and so did I. We celebrated every finished wall, every installed window. I learned how to hold a drill, hang drywall, seal a leak. It was more than construction, it was transformation. I was building not just a home, but a version of myself I had once believed was lost. The frame was up, the roof went on. I could walk through rooms that didn't exist just months ago. A living room full of light, a kitchen with space for dancing, a front porch just wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. Sometimes I stood in the doorway at dusk, imagining what life would look like inside these walls. It no longer felt like chasing something impossible. It felt like coming home. One morning, I got a call from a local community group asking if I'd speak at their resilience conference. I almost said no. I wasn't a speaker, I was just a person who lost their house. But I said yes. At the event, I stood behind the microphone, hands trembling, and told my story. The fire, the loss, the build, the people. When I finished, the room was quiet, and then the applause came. But even louder were the tears, the hugs, the people who came after to say, "Me too." That night, something changed. I realized my story wasn't just about me. It was about us. Speaking led to writing. Writing led to mentoring. I helped others who had lost homes, through fires, floods, divorces, life. I wasn't just building walls. I was building bridges. What started as tragedy became testimony. People began to see me not as the woman who lost everything, but the woman who rebuilt. And with every conversation, every workshop, every hand I held through grief, I felt more certain. This was my purpose. The final coat of paint dried in early spring. I chose warm tones, earthy browns, soft greens, colors that felt alive. On move-in day, friends gathered. We carried boxes, laughed, shared pizza on the floor. There was no furniture yet, but the space was already full, with love, with memory, with hope. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, whispering thanks, breathing in the scent of possibility. At sunset, I sat on the porch with Marcus, both of us dusty and tired. "You did it," he said. I smiled. "We did it." But not all fires are made of flame. A few months in, I faced something harder, grief I'd been holding at bay. Dreams I'd left behind. A betrayal from someone I trusted. It burned quieter than the fire that took my house, but it scorched just as deep. There were nights I cried, mornings I couldn't get out of bed, days when doubt whispered that maybe I wasn't as strong as I thought. But I kept showing up. For others. For myself. I talked. I wrote. I asked for help when I needed it. And in those moments, I discovered a deeper truth. Healing isn't a destination. It's a rhythm. A return. A breath. I installed the last cabinet door myself. It was a small thing. 1 hinge. 2 screws. But I stood back and stared at it like it was a masterpiece. This home was mine. Not because I bought it, but because I built it. With my hands. With my tears. With my hope. I threw a small gathering to celebrate. Nothing fancy. Just food. Music. Stories shared on the porch. We laughed about dropped hammers and crooked shelves. And when the night was quiet, I stood alone in the living room and whispered, "Thank you." To the fire. To the people. To the version of me that never gave up. There were names I never forgot. Marcus. Ed Lenny. The woman with the granola bar. Tom and his porch memory. My sister, who called every night, even when I said I was fine. Some drifted away. Some became lifelong friends. But they all mattered. They reminded me that community isn't just geography. It's presence. It's showing up. It's believing in someone when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves. And that belief is what carried me through. With time, I started a project, From the Ashes Foundation, to help others who lost homes start again. We collected supplies, built emergency kits, offered workshops on emotional recovery. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about showing up, like people did for me. That project became a movement, a fire of its own. Not destructive, but illuminating. Each morning, I sit on the porch with coffee in hand and watch the world wake up. Children ride bikes. Neighbors wave. Flowers bloom in the front yard I once thought would never exist again. The scars are still there, on my skin and my heart, but they don't hurt like they used to. They remind me where I've been, who I am, what I've built, and most of all, they remind me to keep going. The fire took my home, but it gave me a life. Not one I expected, but one I chose. A life rooted in purpose, lit by hope, shaped by people who loved me at my lowest. Now, when I see fire, I don't flinch. I remember that night, yes, but I also remember the morning after. The first brick, the laughter, the hands that held mine. From those ashes, I built something fireproof. A life no flame can touch. A life that rises, again and again.